Imagine yourself lying calmly in a dimly lit room, your breath slowly adjusting to the unhurried rhythm of time, while your mind drifts toward the vast desert where the night wind carries grains of sand that never cease their wandering. In the distance, the pyramids rise like eternal silhouettes, as if guarding secrets of thousands of years that have never truly been spoken. Night in ancient Egypt feels long, filled with whispers that have no source, only echoes repeating within the silence. This is the beginning of our journey, not a hurried one, but a gentle current carrying us to follow the traces of pharaohs who sleep in eternity. There is nothing you need to do except listen, allowing the voice of words to carry you deeper into layers of time far removed from the present world. Let your body relax, as if the desert sands that burned under the sun now turn cool and soft, slowly covering you. There is no harsh sound, only the widening of calm, inviting curiosity that does not demand, but arrives patiently, just as history hides itself beneath layers of earth and stone. We will walk together through the hidden tombs of the pharaohs, observing without haste, listening without the need to understand, and feeling without needing to answer. This journey is not about reaching an end, but about touching shadows that still linger in the air, like traces of incense left in an ancient sanctuary. Let your inner eyes slowly open, seeing that beyond the silent desert lies another world waiting to be observed in tranquility. As you remain lying in this calmness, imagine the cool desert air gently touching your skin, carrying a faint scent of dry earth that has kept stories for thousands of years. Nothing is hurried, nothing needs to be pursued. Only time moving in long steps, like the rhythm of the night at the edge of the Nile. That river once served as the lifeblood of existence, flowing slowly through barren lands, giving drink to the arid soil, nurturing grains of wheat, and bearing witness to the birth of a civilization that is not easily forgotten. Around it, mud brick houses stood in simplicity. Oil lamps burned dimly, while soft songs could be heard from afar, like prayers that never ceased to rise toward the heavens. Each grain of sand carried by the wind held a shadow of the past, as if every grain contained a name, an event, a secret never fully told. The night spread a silence that was not empty, but filled with small traces, faint marks of human hands that once built and departed. Above all this, the stars hung high, just as they did thousands of years ago, shining upon shepherds, priests, and pharaohs with a light that never fades. Imagine yourself gazing at the very same stars they once saw, stars that guided boats along the Nile, stars that marked the seasons of harvest, stars silently worshipped as gateways to the realm of the gods. In this calmness, we do not merely hear history, we feel it, as a subtle pulse still alive in the air, even though all that once was is now buried beneath the sands. Let your mind follow this gentle current, slowly entering the quiet corridors of time, corridors that will lead us closer to the secrets of the pharaohs that remain tightly sealed. Imagine us slowly moving into the pathways of time, into a year that cannot be precisely recorded, a period that can only be estimated through fragments of stone faded, hieroglyphs, and pieces of wood discovered at the bottom of tombs. Scholars call it thousands of years before our reckoning. when Egypt was still a kingdom growing along the banks of the Nile, surrounded by vast deserts and an unchanging sky. Those years had no numbers as we know them today. They were measured by the annual flooding of the river, by planting seasons, and by grand festivals that marked the journeys of gods across the heavens. When the floods arrived, the land grew fertile, fields were sown, and life pulsed once more. Yet behind that fertility lingered fear of the long dry seasons. When waters receded, the earth cracked, and the shadow of famine loomed. The location of this kingdom may seem simple through modern eyes, merely stretches of sand along river, and heavy stones, but it was there that a civilization rose, building pyramids that never collapsed, carving tombs that are not easily discovered, and leaving monuments that defy time itself. Ancient Egypt lived within a fragile balance between life and death, between light and darkness, between the realm of mortals and the realm of the gods. From those indistinct years, we possess only fragments of stories, shards of pottery, and tomb chambers that seem to speak in a language no longer understood. The mystery lies not only in where those hidden tombs rest, but in how they were concealed so deeply, as if they knew the future would try to unearth them. We stand at the threshold of a blurred era, gazing into a corridor of time that cannot be explained by precise numbers, only by the sense that beneath the layers of sand, a life once truly existed. The location of ancient Egypt was a lifeline that never broke, a long path called the Nile River that split the barren desert into fertile green corridors. Every civilization that grew there depended entirely on that flow of water, and from it arose stone cities, grand temples, and hidden tombs carved deep into the earth. If we close our eyes and try to listen again, we might feel the desert wind drifting, the sound of ominous birds passing through the evening sky, and the distant rhythm of stonecutters striking their chisels against walls. Those were the years when cities like Memphis and Thebes flourished as centers of the kingdom, filled with markets, crowds, and the scent of incense burned for the gods. Yet behind that bustle lay another world rarely acknowledged, an underground realm slowly dug in secrecy. Rulers commanded the construction of tombs not merely as resting places, but as eternal houses, sacred chambers meant to be hidden from ordinary eyes. The desert became the perfect keeper, for sand could swallow everything, preserving tombs for thousands of years untouched. But Egypt was not only about tombs and pyramids. It was also about daily life, about people planting wheat, baking bread, fishing in the river, and lighting lamps at night. This contrast created a deep sense of mystery. For on one side, they lived with simplicity, while on the other, they built eternal monuments we can never fully comprehend. When we speak of the geography of Egypt, we do not speak only of a place on a map, but of a symbolic landscape, where every stone and every line of sand seems to whisper of connections between this world and the unseen. The mystery of hidden tombs is only a small part of that landscape, like a shadow slipping behind the light of the setting sun. If we follow the course of time, the centuries of ancient Egypt are not merely a sequence of years to be counted, but a long current, sometimes swift, sometimes calm, like the flow of the Nile itself. There were times when pharaohs ruled with absolute power, raising pyramids that touched the horizon, and times when the kingdom grew fragile, shaken by civil wars or threatened by foreign peoples arriving from the desert or the sea. Yet amid those periods of turmoil, one thread never broke the belief in life after death. This was what made tombs central, not only as houses of death, but as symbols of continuity. Many ancient texts describe the tomb as the second body of the king, a vessel to hold his soul for its long journey into the duat, the enigmatic underworld. It is no wonder, then, that tombs were designed as if they were small underground cities, complete with storage chambers, secret passages, even ceilings painted with false stars to guide the spirit in the darkness. Most of the tombs we know today were discovered in the Valley of the Kings, a barren gorge on the western side of Thebes, where rock was carefully carved to conceal secret chambers. Yet history also records that many tombs vanished without a trace, swallowed by sand or deliberately hidden by their builders to protect them from looters. Some were dug, discovered, then sealed again, as if destined to remain mysteries. To this day, archaeologists believe that beneath layers of sand and stone, there are doors still unopened, corridors untouched by light. This is the stage on which our story rests, a vast arena where humans, gods, and time converge, leaving riddles that can never be fully answered. Imagine for a moment we are in a morning far in the past, when the sun has just risen over the desert and its golden rays slowly warm the cliffs of stone. In the distance come the sounds of footsteps, workers walking in line, leaving their small settlement toward the gorge where the tombs of kings are carved. They wear simple linen garments bleached pale by the relentless sun, carrying tools of stone and copper, and water jars slung over their shoulders. The air is quiet, broken only by the occasional call of a desert bird or the wind rushing through the rocky gaps. They do not know who will look upon their work thousands of years later, yet they believe every carving, every corridor, every sign they shape will be seen by the gods. The daily lives of these tomb diggers are humble, yet filled with meaning. They rise at dawn, eat coarse bread and onions, then walk together to the silent work site. There, they transform the unyielding stone into ordered chambers, carving walls with images of gods and goddesses, inscribing hieroglyphs that would serve as long prayers for the departed king. The work is grueling, filled with danger, yet also pride, for they know they are building an eternal house for one considered the bridge between the human world and the divine. At times, within the silence of the excavation, they might feel that the sound of hammer against stone is not merely labor, but prayer itself, each strike a vibration, echoing into the underworld. If we sit at the edge and merely observe, we will see weary yet steadfast faces, eyes filled with devotion, and hands that continue despite their wounds. No one knows if they thought of the future, or if they simply lived each day in its rhythm. But it is clear that in every dark corridor they carved, a trace of humanity remains for us to feel even now, a quiet whisper from thousands of years ago. If we walk closer into the corridor being carved, we will feel a chill unlike the desert heat outside. Inside, small oil lamps flicker dimly, their light trembling across the rough, unfinished walls. Some workers sit cross-legged, sharpening their chisels on smooth stones, while others strike slowly, hammering the hard bedrock in a rhythm that almost sounds like music. Dust hangs in the air, clinging to their hair, their skin, and their linen garments, so that their bodies seem to merge with the stone itself. In the silence of the passage, only the sigh of breath, the tapping of hammers, and the occasional whisper of prayer can be heard. For them, the work is not merely the making of empty chambers, but the shaping of a pathway for the king's soul to cross from this world to the next. Each symbol carved is not decoration, but a spell believed to open the gates of heaven and guide the pharaoh, so he would not lose his way on the journey to eternity. If we linger long enough, we may notice a blend of feelings that fills the chamber. The weariness of ordinary men mingled with the immense faith in the meaning of their labor. At times, one worker pauses, wiping sweat with a dusty hand, then gazes at the wall slowly taking form. There is a quiet pride in him, though he knows he is only one among many, a name that will never be remembered in the scrolls of history. Yet his handprint remains, etched into the fine or rough lines of the carving, a silent witness that cannot be erased by time. Imagine that when we touch those walls today, we are in fact touching a life long gone, a life filled with secrets, a life once vividly real in the darkness of the ancient tomb corridors. Inside a deeper chamber beyond the corridor, we will find the walls slowly covered in carvings. Lines that appear rigid from afar reveal astonishing detail when approached closely. A bird with outstretched wings is carefully chiseled, as though it is about to soar free from the stone. Beside it, a human figure with a calm face stands facing a god, carrying offerings of bread and jars of wine. The carving is not merely a story, but a guide to the journey of the soul. The bird symbolizes the freedom of spirit, while the human figure shows eternal devotion. If we sit quietly before the carving, it may feel as though the chamber becomes a silent stage for a cosmic drama between life and death. On another wall, the symbol of an eye is etched sharply, staring from the darkness, never blinking, as though ensuring that whoever enters this chamber understands they are being watched by higher powers. Beneath the eye, rows of hieroglyphs remain difficult to fully grasp, yet each curve and line seems like a prayer bound to the wall, never to be released by time. At times, we may imagine the faint voice of an ancient scribe reading the hieroglyphs aloud, when they were first inscribed, his words echoing through the empty chamber, then fading into the abyss of millennia. And now, we stand within the same chamber, sensing echoes that never truly vanished. Small objects found on the floor, such as shards of pottery, beads, or fragments of stone tools, serve as further proof that this place was once alive with activity. They are simple remnants left behind, not displayed in grandeur, yet they carry the strongest silence. By noticing these small details, we are invited not only to look upon the grand and monumental, but also to remember the daily life that once touched these walls with mortal hands. Each carving, each object, each trace is a whisper from the past, striving to remain heard even as the world around it keeps changing. Imagine for a moment when the corridors and chambers were not as silent as they are now, when the stones were still fresh from the chisels of human hands. We can picture workers sitting and resting near the dim torches, their hands still covered with dust from fragments falling off the rock. The air was filled with the hum of tools striking the walls, repetitive sounds that sometimes made the entire corridor tremble. They worked with a certain rhythm, as if each strike followed an inaudible melody lingering in the air. Among them, a scribe sat with a wooden board, recording the materials used, the number of workers, and the short prayers whispered before the work resumed. Life inside the cave or tomb was not always darkness, for the torchlight flickered, casting moving shadows on the walls, making the carvings already present seem to sway. Those shadows became part of the atmosphere, as if the spirits portrayed in the carvings were indeed present, witnessing the creation of a place meant to last forever. When the daylight outside burned harshly, the corridors remained cool, the only comfort for those who worked tirelessly. Yet that comfort was paid for with fatigue, aching backs, and eyes stung by torch smoke. Sometimes a worker coughed harshly, his voice echoing through the passage, causing others to pause briefly, then return to work without much conversation. Occasionally whispers could be heard, perhaps a small story about family or a prayer for smooth progress. All of these form the texture of daily life, very simple, yet, if observed calmly, even this ordinary existence carried mystery. For every bit of effort was not only to build a chamber, but to create something believed to outlast time itself. Within the corridor slowly taking shape was not only tools and the sound of chisels that filled the air, but also the first objects that began to be brought inside as offerings. We can imagine a designated guardian arriving with a simple clay vessel. Inside it, fragrant oils made from papyrus flowers and tree resins. The scent mingled with the torch smoke, spreading a distinctive aroma that marked the chamber as different from the outer world. In another corner, a worker placed a basket filled with wheat and dates. Simple food, yet regarded as provisions for the soulless journey through the long corridor toward the afterlife. No one knows precisely when such objects were introduced before the chamber was fully complete, but tradition always walked side by side with construction. Even before the walls were finished being carved, the place was already infused with signs of sanctity, with the belief that the pharaoh's spirit would not wait long to claim his space. Each object was laid down calmly, unhurried, as if the hands that carried them knew that whatever was placed here no longer belonged to the mortal world. Sometimes a small copper vessel containing water from the Nile was also brought in, sprinkled onto the floor as though that water carried life capable of piercing the stillness of stone. Imagine the silence when workers paused for a moment, bowing as a priest whispered a prayer and lit a small incense, its smoke rising slowly to fill the room. There was no commotion, no celebration, only a quiet moment that felt stronger than any sound. From that instant, the chamber that had once been merely the product of human labor transformed into something else, a gateway meant to connect the mortal world with the unseen one. As the corridor grew longer and its walls became smoother, special carvers arrived, assigned not to pierce the stone, but to inscribe symbols upon it. They came with small copper tools, sharp yet fragile, and sat patiently before the cold limestone walls. There was no loud hammering, only the slow scratching sound that left behind line after line. We can imagine how slow the process unfolded, as if time underground moved differently than it did above the surface. A single curved line, a small sun, a hieroglyph symbolizing a river or a bird. Each crafted with precision, though no one knew who would ever see them again thousands of years later. Sometimes the carvers lit an extra lamp, so that light could reveal every delicate shadow upon the wall. They copied patterns perhaps given by priests or by scribes of the palace who had earlier drawn designs on papyrus. The wall gradually transformed into a kind of silent scripture that would never be fully recited, filled with symbols comprehensible only to those who mastered the secret language of civilization. Within the silence of that chamber, each symbol seemed to echo, not with sound, but with a presence that made other workers feel a certain aura. A digger might bow his head when passing a wall already covered in marks, sensing as if unseen eyes were watching from behind the carvings. Not all inscriptions appeared beautiful. Some were simple, some eroded even as they were being made, yet all became part of the sacred impression. They did not merely record prayers for the pharaoh's journey, but also conveyed the belief that another world indeed awaited. Not far away, only beyond the doorway being patiently constructed. The flickering torchlight along the corridor made the carvings on the walls seem as though they were breathing. The shadows of symbols moved with the flames, sometimes stretching, sometimes shrinking, creating the illusion that the carved bird could flap its wings, or the small sun etched into stone could slowly turn. Workers resting nearby often watched the dance of shadows in silence, as if witnessing a ritual not meant for them, but for something greater. Smoke from the torches clung to the ceiling, leaving thin black stains that grew thicker over time and in the darkness beyond the reach of Quant. And the reach of light, the corridor felt like a space between the living world and the unseen one. Those laboring inside knew that above ground, life continued as always. Markets were busy. Children played in the streets, yet down here beneath the earth, time seemed different, slower, heavier. Each carving seemed to bind the passage with prayers, promises, or even faint threats, unspoken in words yet carried through form. At times, a carver paused to observe his lines, wiping the sweat from his brow with dirty hands. No praise awaited him, no record of his name, yet his scratches would endure far longer than his own existence. For us who imagine it today, a question may arise. Did they realize their simple labor was planting echoes that would travel across thousands of years, or were they only focused on the daily task, never suspecting that eyes in the distant future would attempt to interpret every line? It was the shadows dancing on the walls that gave life to a space that was otherwise dead, a quiet life that unfolded alongside. The dripping of water from the ceiling, a subtle life that never ceased, even though all who carved it had long since vanished. As night grew deeper and some workers rested above ground, the unfinished corridors were sometimes used by priests to test the resonance of prayers. They arrived with slow steps, carrying incense whose fragrance was soft yet piercing, filling the narrow air with smoke that rolled like a thin fog. The smoke mingled with the trembling torchlight, creating an atmosphere almost dreamlike. The priests spoke little, only exchanged silent glances, then began chanting mantras in a low, repetitive tone, like the whisper of wind passing through stone. Their voices traveled along the walls, echoed back, and returned as faint reverberations, making it difficult to distinguish between the original sound and its reflection. Workers who happened to remain nearby often felt their skin crawl, as though they were witnessing a secret rite not meant for their eyes. The prayers were not only for the gods, but also for the chamber itself, that its walls remain strong, its carvings endure, and the corridor withstand the weight of time and the secrets it carried. There was a belief that without prayer, even stone could crack before its time, and the tomb would become nothing more than an empty hole without meaning. When the incense burned away and the torches dimmed, the passage slowly returned to silence, leaving only the scent of smoke clinging to the stone and faint echoes that seemed to linger in the air long after the voices had ceased. For us imagining it now, there feels a difference between a corridor that is merely empty and one that has been touched by prayer, as though the space absorbs a fragment of spirit from every word spoken within it. There are no official records of these prayers, no texts preserved for us today, only a faint picture pieced together from fragments of evidence. And the rest is conjecture as silent as the corridor that returned to darkness after the last priest had departed. Along the walls of the corridor that slowly shaped the path toward deeper chambers, artisans began carving symbols not always easy to understand. They were not mere writings, nor mere drawings, but a blend of sacred marks, prayers, and notes meant to be read only by those who knew their secrets. There were eyes that always watched, birds with wings spread as if ready to fly, lines repeating like waves of water, and circles surrounded by small dots as though representing stars in the sky. For the artisans carving them, every incision was part of a conversation with the unseen, as if the wall was not just stone, but a door waiting to open toward another realm. Torchlight made the carvings appear to move, shadows trembling like living beings. And those who stared too long often felt as though the walls themselves were staring back. No one knew for certain whether the symbols were intended for ancestral spirits, for the gods, or for the soul of the pharaoh destined to dwell within. What was clear was that the symbols always repeated in patterns, almost like a song, echoed across several parts of the corridor with similar arrangements, as though reminding that everything carried its own rhythm. Today, we can read only a fraction of their meaning through the study of hieroglyphs. Yet some signs remain ambiguous, too faint to interpret with certainty. Perhaps they were never meant for us, but for those long departed, or even for the chamber itself that carried the resonance of eternity. In silence, the walls still stand with carvings preserved across millennia. And though we gaze at them with awe, we know there is a layer of meaning we may never reach, like a secret conversation between the world of men and the realm of spirits. The symbols still echo without sound, waiting for anyone brave enough to listen with a quiet heart. The deeper the corridor was carved, the workers eventually reached a point where solid rock had to be hollowed out to shape the burial chamber-esque core. There was no light other than torches, and the most constant sound was the pounding of hammers against chisels, repeating endlessly like the steady heartbeat within the earth's belly. The vibrations from each strike traveled through the walls, producing long echoes, at times resembling faint whispers, as though the stone itself was slowly responding to those trying to pierce it. The workers' shadows trembled across the walls, their weary faces merging with the carvings already inscribed, creating a scene where man and symbol became difficult to separate. They worked with a rhythm almost ritualistic, for each day unfolded with the same pattern, striking, cutting, clearing debris, then repeating again. From our perspective today, the chamber that eventually emerged may appear simple, only a square of hollowed stone, but in the silence of millennia past, every stroke of the chisel was a prayer. Every falling fragment of rock, a small sacrifice united in building something greater than their own lives. No one knows how long it took to hollow such a space, perhaps years, perhaps spanning generations of laborers. In the darkness, their bodies sweated, their breaths echoed against damp walls, and amidst their toil, they must have wondered whether the chamber they carved would truly guide the pharaoh toward eternal life, or if it would become nothing more than a silent room abandoned to the dust of time. Yet none dared voice such doubts aloud, for within the ever-deepening space, belief was the only force that kept their hands moving. The burial core slowly began to take form, like a stone womb awaiting secrets to be placed within. When the chamber's hard interior was finally shaped, the next task was no longer merely carving stone, but transforming the rough walls into surfaces able to bear sacred symbols. Artisans entered carrying simple palettes of paint, made from finely ground mineral pigments mixed with water, and at times bound with resin from plants. Red came from hematite, yellow from ochre, blue from rare lapis lazuli, and green from crushed malachite. Each brush stroke upon the cold stone was a statement that this chamber was not empty, but a great book meant to be read even after ruler and subjects had vanished. The inscriptions began with faint guiding lines, then were chiseled into figures of men with sideways faces and rigid proportions, yet filled with symbolic meaning. Gods were depicted standing tall, their hands holding staffs, ankhs, or other emblems of power. The pharaoh appeared larger than all others around him, affirming that he was not merely a king, but the very axis of the cosmos itself. Hieroglyphic symbols were woven among the images, flowing like currents that connected text and picture, prayer and world, life and death. The workers who painted them may not have understood every meaning, yet they knew each line was a bridge linking man with something higher. As they labored, the torchlight reflected shadows of color across the chamber, making the walls seem to pulse with life, as if the gods themselves were present, observing the birth of this sacred place. No sound filled the air, but the sweep of brushes and the low murmurs of instruction. Yet the silence was denser than any crowd. What had once been an empty hollow now began to breathe with layers of color, prayers and symbols becoming a small world that mirrored the greater one outside. Once the walls were filled with colors and symbols that told their story, the chamber was no longer regarded as merely a hollow in the rock, but as a vessel for something greater than daily life. Then came the moment when sacred objects were brought inside, not by rough laborers, but by chosen hands deemed worthy to touch them. Outside, wooden chests had been prepared, coated with resin to resist dampness, and within them lay the possessions meant to serve as provisions for the king's journey. There were fine alabaster jars filled with perfumes made from myrrh and cedar resin, thick and fragrant liquids believed to please the gods. There were small statues of protective deities called ushabti, their faces rigid yet trusted to rise as servants in the other realm. There were golden ornaments, bracelets, necklaces, and rings set with blue and green stones, not only to display wealth, but believed to guard the body through the darkness. Alongside them lay ceremonial weapons, daggers with golden hilts, small bows, and flint-tipped arrows sharpened as if the pharaoh would still need to hunt even after his last breath. Each item was placed with care, as though following an unwritten map, a pattern that if disturbed might unbalance the bond between this world and the unseen. Priests leading the ritual carried burning incense, its smoke filling the narrow chamber, making the air heavy and almost unbreathable, yet it was there that spirits were thought to enter and dwell. The torchlight flickered against the gleam of gold, creating the illusion that the objects already had life, waiting for their master to arrive. No one asked the purpose of it all, for the answer was always the same. Death was not the end, but a doorway requiring a key, and these were the keys that would open the passage. Thus the chamber slowly transformed into the womb of the earth, holding not only a body, but an entire world in miniature, a world reordered, so that the ruler remained sovereign, even in a place unseen by human eyes. The long-awaited night finally arrived when the pharaoh's body, wrapped in thick layers of linen, was carried into the chamber prepared for him. Outside, the air was silent, with only the whisper of sand swept by the desert wind, as if nature itself guarded the procession from intrusion. The coffin, made of cedar wood and overlaid with gold, was placed upon a special cart, slowly pulled by attendants clad in simple white garments, their faces veiled with thin cloth so that neither dust nor human breath would defile the sanctity of the rite. Torches lined the narrow passage into the tomb, their wavering light flickering against the wind, casting long shadows that seemed to guide the journey from the world of light into eternal darkness. Before the coffin, priests carried incense, their prayers never spoken loudly, but whispered into the air, as though greeting the spirit already waiting. The scent of resin, myrrh, and incense mingled together, saturating the tight space with an aroma both strange and calming, as if even the stone walls absorbed it as a seal of secrecy. When the coffin finally passed through the great stone doorway, it felt as though every breath among those present was held. For they knew this was the threshold that divided humanity from the known world to one from which no one could return to tell. Slowly, the coffin was lowered into the main chamber, placed at the center of the room already filled with provisions for the journey. The light reflected off the coffin's golden surface, casting glimmers that seemed alive, as though the pharaoh still reigned beyond death. There were no cries, no music, only thick silence, punctuated by the echo of footsteps upon stone and the occasional rustle of linen. Everything was performed in measured rhythm, calm, unhurried, for every gesture was considered part of an unwritten prayer. In that moment, time seemed to lose its meaning, and all that remained was the sense that the chamber had become a bridge. no longer merely a tomb, but a passage toward something imagined, yet never truly known. Once the coffin had been perfectly placed in the main chamber, the attendants slowly stepped back, leaving a circle now filled only with silence. The eldest priest gave a signal, and the final ritual began. A long prayer recited, while fine dust from crushed sapphire was scattered. The dust fell gently into the air, glimmered briefly under torchlight, and then vanished as though absorbed by the darkness. Each particle was believed to represent a star that would guide the pharaoh's soul across the night sky. Afterward, the workers whose faces would never be recorded in inscriptions moved forward, hauling massive sandstone blocks with ropes and wooden levers. Their steps were heavy, yet they worked in silence, as though they knew that loud noise could disturb the fragile balance between the living world and the world of the dead. Slowly, the great sandstone door began to slide shut, its grinding sound echoing low, like the earth itself groaning in reluctance to seal away its secret. The torches that still burned outside the chamber were extinguished one by one, until only a dim glow remained within, which soon also faded, leaving total darkness. In that darkness, all the treasures, all the prayers, and the pharaoh's body were locked away, forever separated from the world, still moving above. No one could know whether the soul truly found its path to another realm, or if it lingered, trapped in the endless stillness of stone. Yet for those who sealed the door, their duty was finished, and they walked away with heavy hearts, aware that what they had done must never be spoken of aloud. The desert reclaimed the surface, covering footsteps with shifting grains of sand, until nothing remained but silence, and beneath it, a secret never again touched by the sun. Time moved in imperceptible ways, and the vast desert worked as the most faithful guardian of the pharaoh's secrets. Winds carried sand from one dune to another, slowly sealing the entrances until no trace remained that beneath the surface had once been chambers lit by torches and filled with long prayers. Generations passed. The people who had once taken part in the burials long dead, their names forgotten, their stories reduced to faint whispers among wandering shepherds. Some said that beneath the desert lay a hidden city, full of gold and the voices of spirits lamenting under the full moon. Others believed the desert itself was a sleeping giant, and the tombs of kings were merely its veins, pulsing within. No one truly knew, and that uncertainty only made the tales cling tighter, filling the imagination of travelers resting beneath the stars. Night after night, the sand shifted, covering all traces, as if seeking to erase human interference, until the tombs became indistinguishable from the desert surrounding them. Only occasionally, when great storms swept across and scoured the surface, would a fragment of stone or a faint carving appear, hinting that something had once been there. But even those signs quickly vanished, swallowed again by shifting layers of sand. In this way, the pharaoh's tombs turned into legend, no longer tangible places to be touched, but spaces suspended between reality and myth, revived only through stories spoken in hushed tones around a fire. As the world began to change and new kingdoms rose far from the banks of the Nile, there were always those drawn back to the silent desert, as if whispers from the ancient tombs called to them in dreams. The earliest explorers came not with archaeology as it is known today, but with thirst for treasure and the desire to unveil the secrets promised by legend. They traveled with long caravans, carrying water in leather skins, their camels tracing faint trails that no longer seemed recognizable. Each night, they gathered around fires, listening to old tales from local guides who spoke of kings buried with golden swords, or queens sleeping inside chests of countless jewels. Yet, when morning came, they found only sand and stone, flat and unyielding. At times, one or two of them discovered small fragments, perhaps a broken statue or a stone with faint carvings, but never enough to prove the stories that had driven their journeys. And with each failure, the mystery of the tombs grew stronger. For what remains unseen is often more frightening and more alluring than what is found. In time, these explorers themselves became part of legend, spoken of as those who vanished into the desert, never to return. As though the tombs protected themselves gently but absolutely, swallowing those who tried to force their doors open. The tales of those who vanished in the desert spread slowly, carried by trading caravans that stopped at oases and small villages along the Nile. From these stories grew the whispers of the Pharaoh's curse, a belief that the tombs held not only bodies but also unseen forces guarding their rest. People began to believe that anyone who tried to open the tomb's doors would bring disaster, whether it be strange illness, sudden death, or inexplicable loss. Among common folk, the tale became a kind of prayer of warning, reminding them not to be greedy and to honor the dead. Among nobles and rulers, the story turned into legend, further strengthening the aura of the old pharaohs, for even in death they were thought to control the fates of the living. And whenever a desert storm swallowed an entire caravan, or the Nile suddenly flooded and destroyed a village, people whispered that the spirits of the kings were angered. There was no real proof, only events interpreted through fear. Yet within that fear, the tombs remained sealed, protected not merely by stone doors, but by a collective belief stronger than iron, the belief that there were secrets which must never be touched. Imagine, on a quiet night when stars scatter across the desert sky and the wind carries grains of sand softly, that we attempt to step inside the sealed tomb with nothing but imagination. The cold, heavy stone door seems to open slowly, revealing a long corridor, dark, narrow, and filled with the damp scent of air, trapped for thousands of years. Its walls are covered in paintings of red, yellow, and black, still faintly shimmering, though time has worn away the pigments. Images of gods with animal faces stare from behind the flicker of a torch, as if watching every step that enters. On the floor, grains of sand mix with fine, glittering dust, perhaps remnants of shattered jewelry or corroded metal. A faint sound, barely audible, comes from drops of water falling in a corner, adding to the sense that the tomb is still alive, breathing with a rhythm that cannot be explained. Each chamber connects to another passage, forming a labyrinth that seems endless until at last it opens into a great hall with a massive stone sarcophagus tightly sealed, carved with hieroglyphs, telling the story of a soul's journey to the other world. Their silence becomes complete, and one feels that time no longer moves, as if everything were frozen in a single unending breath. In that great chamber, the shadows of the torch moved slowly across the wall carvings, creating the illusion that the ancient images were coming back to life. A bird with a human head seemed to flap its wings gently, while a figure with the face of a jackal appeared to smile faintly from behind the trembling light. Near the sarcophagus lay a wooden chest, decayed yet still bearing traces of delicate carvings, perhaps once adorned with jewels that are now gone, leaving only hollow impressions upon its surface. A clay jar rested on its side, its mouth sealed tightly with hardened ancient wax, as though still guarding contents that must not be disturbed. The glittering dust in the air seemed like fragments of time itself, broken into tiny particles swirling with a faint current of wind seeping through a small crack in the wall. The scent of damp stone mingled with the faint aroma of old resin, forming an atmosphere not entirely unfamiliar, as though one had been here before, in a distant and hazy memory. The heart seemed to whisper, asking who lies beyond that heavy stone, what they carried with them, and why this tomb had been left locked for thousands of years, untouched by human hands. At this point, the line between reality and imagination blurred, for the chamber itself seemed to possess awareness, guarding secrets that could never be fully revealed. Every object in that chamber seemed to be a silent witness to the journey of a king once regarded as the incarnation of a god on earth. The tiny carvings on the surface of the wooden chest depicted a grand banquet, where the pharaoh sat upon a throne with the double crown upon his head, while attendants carried cups and round loaves carefully engraved in detail. The clay jars sealed with wax may once have held fragrant oils of myrrh or frankincense, gifts from distant lands that sailed across the Red Sea as far as Nubia. Meanwhile, fragments of fine cloth that remained, though fragile, appeared once to have been part of ceremonial garments worn only in the most sacred rituals. The dust clinging to the faint traces of gold seemed still to hold reflections of the desert sun, the same light that once shone upon the pyramids when they were new and majestic. Every detail in the chamber was not merely an inanimate object, but a fragment of narrative reconstructing the life of a man who believed that death was only a doorway to rebirth. And within the silent whispers of stone and decaying fabric, one might almost hear the gentle footsteps of the past. The steps of a pharaoh still walking among his relics, ensuring that his story would not vanish with time. Among all the objects, one appeared the simplest yet radiated a deeper mystery. A wooden staff laid askew in the corner of the chamber. At first glance, it seemed no more than an aged piece of wood cracked by time. Yet, upon closer inspection, its surface was covered in fine spiral carvings, repeating endlessly, as though symbolizing a journey without end. Perhaps it was a ceremonial staff once held by the pharaoh as he walked before his people. Or perhaps it was only a symbol placed beside his body to ensure his authority endured in the afterlife. In ancient Egyptian culture, the staff was not merely a walking aid, but an irreplaceable emblem of power. A reminder that the king was the shepherd guiding the flock of humankind. When the lantern's glow fell upon its surface, the elongated shadow cast upon the floor resembled the silhouette of a man standing tall with solemn authority. It was as though the staff still carried the echoes of a ruler's footsteps, calmly treading the thin boundary between the mortal realm and the eternal. And in that quiet moment, anyone standing there might feel that this simple object was a key, not merely dead wood, but a doorway to a broader understanding of how the Egyptians saw death as the continuation of life. As the air within the chamber grew colder, the silence enveloping the tomb thickened, like an invisible mist pressing gently upon the chest. Some researchers who had once entered recorded a sensation they could not explain, as though an unseen presence was quietly observing their every move. Footsteps echoing across the stone floor seemed to answer with a sound older still, a resonance not from those present, but from the walls themselves. The scent of dust mingled with remnants of ancient resin filled the space, evoking the sense that time had not truly moved here, that thousands of years were but an illusion, and the pharaoh still rested not far away. In the dim glow, hieroglyphic carvings seemed like eyes quietly aflame, following visitors with a calm yet secretive gaze. No one could ever truly confirm whether what they felt was only suggestion born of the atmosphere, or whether something remained behind, some eternal force guarding the serenity of this tomb. Within that hushed space, the boundary between the living and the afterlife seemed blurred, making anyone who lingered too long begin to feel themselves drifting into subtle whispers that were never spoken aloud. Inside the tomb, time no longer felt like a steady flow, but rather like a circle endlessly turning, swallowing seconds only to return them in altered forms. Visitors often claimed that the watches they carried did not move as they should. The hands seemed heavy, reluctant to continue their journey. Some noted that 5 minutes stretched into what felt like an hour, while others swore that an hour had vanished without a trace. This strange effect led many to believe that the tomb was not merely a physical chamber, but a kind of threshold where time itself had gone astray. The cold stones seemed to absorb seconds and minutes, then conceal them within unseen layers. Each breath sounded longer, each heartbeat felt slower, and every movement became an echo of the past repeating itself. In such moments, people began to sense they were walking side by side with spirits long departed, sharing the same space and perhaps even the same time. No tangible proof exists that this phenomenon truly occurs, yet those who experienced it always returned. With the same tale that within the tomb, the clock of the world seemed to cease its ticking, replaced by the silent rhythm of eternity. There are moments when the silence inside the tomb is not entirely silent, for some claim to hear faint whispers rising from the cracks within the stone walls. These whispers do not form clear words that one could understand, but instead resemble long breaths woven into the voice of the earth itself. At times, like a whispered prayer, at other times, like a muffled lament. Those who linger long enough within the chamber say the sounds emerge when the lamps begin to dim, when darkness slowly reclaims the space. Some feel the whispers are the voices of ancient workers who once carved the hieroglyphs, forever trapped in their task. Others believe they are the prayers of the pharaoh, sealed within the tomb to remain eternal, echoing endlessly without release. Though no modern recording device has managed to capture these sounds, witnesses swear that their ears heard them clearly, as if the air itself carried a message only perceivable to a still and quiet soul. This phenomenon remains a mystery. Whether an illusion born from suffocating silence or a true eternal echo lingering within those ancient stones. Within the dark, secret-laden tomb, relics lie scattered as though waiting once more to be seen by human eyes. There are small wooden figurines, their surfaces cracked with age, yet still retaining their form, depicting human figures with bird-like heads staring blankly forward. Clay vessels sit coated in thick layers of dust, their interiors holding the faint remains of grain now reduced to fine powder, yet still bearing traces of harvests long past. Gems glimmer faintly beneath the corrosion of gold, their former brilliance reluctant to fade completely. But the most unsettling presence is the sarcophagus that rests at the chamber center, standing as the axis of all silence. The carved face upon its lid seems to gaze upon anyone who dares approach, not with wrath, but with a stillness that pierces. It is as though the stone itself holds knowledge never to be spoken, secrets bound tightly with the body that lies within. These objects are not merely artifacts, but fragments of a vanished life, freezing time and returning to the present whispers of a history that will never be whole. There are whispers that never truly fade about the tombs of the pharaohs, as though every wall carved with hieroglyphs still carries the echo of an unspoken curse. In many ancient accounts, it is said that anyone bold enough to disturb the resting place of an Egyptian king would not only suffer misfortune, but also be drawn into a mysterious realm between life and death. Some archaeologists have recorded strange events following excavations, such as tools breaking suddenly without cause, or lights extinguishing as though swallowed by darkness. There are even tales of the air turning heavy and difficult to breathe when a sarcophagus was first opened, as if the tomb exhaled the final breath of a world long vanished. Perhaps some of it is mere coincidence, or perhaps it is Egypt's way of guarding secrets that must not be disturbed. For beyond the gold, the stone, and the relics lies something unwritten in the records of history, something that can only be felt in silence. Like a faint whisper in the ear of the night, it reminds humanity that there are boundaries best left uncrossed. On certain silent nights when guards kept watch near the tombs, some swore they heard footsteps that did not belong to any living person. The sound came softly yet rhythmically, as though someone were walking along a dust-filled corridor, stopping just behind them, leaving a chill that pierced to the bone. There are also stories of tall shadows sliding across the walls, though no source of light could explain them. Workers sometimes claim to glimpse a robed figure in white standing at the end of a passage, watching them without moving, only to vanish instantly when called out. Though many dismiss such accounts as hallucinations born of exhaustion, the night silence of the ancient Egyptian tombs carries an atmosphere beyond explanation. It is as if every stone, every carving, and every object within holds not only history, but also spirits lingering among us. Spirits that may not be angry, but neither entirely at peace, waiting for something unfinished. The symbols carved into the tomb walls are often thought of as mere decoration or prayers for the pharaoh's journey into the afterlife, yet many researchers believe their meaning runs deeper than ornamental beauty. Some hieroglyphs seem arranged in strange patterns, forming circles or unusual lines, as though resembling a map that leads not to any earthly place, but to another realm. Others are carved with such precision that they can only be seen when torchlight strikes from a certain angle, as if made to be revealed only to chosen eyes. Some archaeologists even suggest that these symbols served as a kind of spiritual guardianship, a code that locked the tomb's secrets from being too easily uncovered. And for those who believe more deeply in the realm of spirits, these symbols are not merely art or codes, but chants that continue to resonate even after thousands of years. To read them is not merely to trace history, but to touch something unexplainable, as though a voice speaks from within the stone, both warning and beckoning. In fragmented ancient records, there are vague descriptions of a nocturnal ceremony performed by priests around the tomb before it was sealed. The ritual is said to have unfolded in murmured prayers repeated again and again, forming a rhythm that soothed yet also instilled fear. The priests wore white linen robes and carried bowls filled with fragrant oils that were slowly burned, their smoke filling the chamber with a sharp scent that clung to the stone walls. At the center of the room, a small statue of black stone was placed, representing an unseen guardian tasked with protecting the pharaoh from evil spirits or intruders from the world of the living. Some historians suspect that this ritual was not merely an act of reverence, but also a means of binding the pharaoh's soul to remain within the tomb, preventing it from wandering in search of escape. For the ancient Egyptians, the realm of the dead was not far removed from that of the living. The two overlapped, watching one another, though not always speaking. Thus the nocturnal ceremony became a boundary, a thin line that divided the two worlds, showing that the mystery remained locked behind pyramid stones and tombs buried deep within the sands. Among the people of ancient Egypt, layered folktales grew about curses awaiting anyone who dared to disturb the tombs of pharaohs. These stories were not written clearly on official papyri, but spread from mouth to mouth, from priest to student, from parent to child. They believed that the air inside the tomb held the final breath of spiritual guardians, and that if inhaled by ordinary humans, it would bring an illness that slowly weakened the body. Others said that the small statues placed in the corners of the chamber could come to life in shadow form, moving without sound to terrify intruders. But the most often told was the whisper at the ear of those who trespassed into the tomb, a faint voice chanting prayers in reverse, confusing the mind until the violator lost their way and became forever trapped in eternal darkness. For the Egyptians, curses were not merely frightening tales, but a way to maintain balance between the world of the living and the dead. By spreading such stories, they created an invisible fortress stronger than any stone wall. A warning that lived on even thousands of years after the pharaohs had fallen asleep in eternity. When the modern age arrived, the ancient myth of tomb curses did not simply vanish, but instead transformed into new stories surrounding each great discovery. As archaeologists of the 19th and 20th centuries began reopening doors that had been sealed for millennia, rumors of sudden deaths and mysterious illnesses quickly spread. The most famous case, of course, concerned the tomb of Tutankhamun, when several people involved in its opening died suddenly, some from infections, some from accidents, and some without clear explanation. The media of the time eagerly linked these events to an ancient curse. igniting the public imagination with the idea that reversed prayers and whispers of spirits truly reached across the ages. Although many historians tried to explain it with medical logic or the conditions of sealed chambers, the shadow of the curse never completely disappeared. Every archaeologist who stepped into Egypt, as underground chambers carried with them two opposing feelings: the passion for knowledge and a subtle fear inherited from thousands of years of legend. It was as if the pharaohs were still watching with unseen eyes, ensuring their secrets would not be so easily uncovered. In the silence of the Egyptian night, among the shadows of the pyramids and the endless desert, the legends of tomb curses mingle with the sound of wind passing through stone. Those who live near the Valley of the Kings sometimes claim to hear faint whispers rising from the cracks in the earth, as if the spirits of rulers still spoke in a language no human can understand. More rational researchers dismiss it as echoes or auditory illusions, yet testimonies continue to surface from time to time. There are tales of blue lights flickering within the dark corridors, or shadows walking slowly across the tomb walls before vanishing into nothing. As with every great mystery, the line between reality and imagination is never clear. And it is precisely there that the timeless allure of ancient Egypt endures. It does not merely gift us monumental architecture and historical records, but also leaves an empty space full of questions, a silence that seems to contain answers. When one gazes upon the Egyptian sky filled with stars, they may feel as though the millennia are still present around them, never truly gone, only waiting to be heard again. So let this tale end like a bedtime story that offers no certainty, only a silence filled with shadows. The pyramids still stand beneath the eternal sky. The tombs of the pharaohs remain buried in the sands, and whispers of mystery still drift along the banks of the Nile. No one knows the true answers to what lies hidden beneath Egypt's soil, and perhaps that is what keeps it alive within our imagination. Like a dream slowly dissolving into the dark, the history of ancient Egypt closes our eyes gently, leaving behind a curiosity that never fades. And when at last we fall asleep, the silhouettes of obelisks, the sound of desert winds, and the starlight clinging to the stones of the pyramids all follow us into the realm of dreams. There the mystery continues to linger, untouched, like an ancient whisper that never ceases, yet always chooses to hide within the silence of the night.